Hello YouTube! So we're back with another video talking about some of the baits of the patch, or some things that are a little overrated, a little underrated. I don't really know what to title this series, but you get the point. We're just going to be talking about things to consider this patch. I'm not going to go over some of like the very standard, lower cost comps. We're going to go over things that people are talking about a little incorrectly in my opinion. So let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is blinged out. So a lot of people talk about this augment as if it's almost like an instant. When you take it, you build true damage units and you just get a top 4, and that's kind of true. I'm not gonna lie, it's a very good augment, but the thing is, it's very much carried by playing around Senna 3. If you take this augment and your goal is to go to like 9 and play Kiana and Akali, I mean, it might work, but the reason the stats for this augment are so good is because people are playing it with Senna 3. If we look at what blinged out actually does, it gives each champion holding items some health and some attack speed. Senna is the true damage champion that kind of benefits the most off attack speed, especially because you're going to be giving her Shojin. They all benefit from health, but that just means your frontline will be better. And if we exclude Senna 3-star here, so if we look at it right now, in 37k games, blinged out averages a 4.2, which is very good. But if we exclude Senna 3, it goes down to 20k games, so 17k games less. And the average skyrockets up to 4.65, right? That's quite a big difference. Again, I'm not trying to say blinged out is not good at all. Like 4.65 is not the worst. It's not great, but you know, the top 4 average is only 46%, which is not great, but the win out is still not bad. So maybe if you do get to Kiana, it's worth. My point here is that if you see this augment and someone told you, oh, that augment is crazy, you might want to consider rerolling Senna if you're not in a position to reroll Senna, or you scout the boards and you've noticed a lot of people are holding Sennas, or some people are playing Chosen Senna. It's not as good as you might think or you might have heard. Overall, still a good augment. Just be careful if you're not in a position to play Senna 3. The next item I wanted to talk about is Jeweled Gauntlet. And by no means is this a bad item, but I actually played a game on a Smurf the other day where I noticed 2 different people had this item slammed at like 2-2 or 2-3 on like a Seraphine, or I don't even remember, or Nami maybe. And you might look at the average. Overall, it's not a bad item, 4.36. The way that Jeweled Gauntlet works, however, is that early game, especially if you don't have a lot of mana generating or additional crit, sometimes it'll just do nothing for you. So if we look at Jeweled Gauntlet here, it makes it so your abilities can critically strike, which is kind of the big deal, right? If you throw a Seraphine ult and it does significantly more damage because of crit, that's nice. But it gives you 35% crit chance, okay? And every unit in the game starts with 25, so you give them Jeweled Gauntlet, and now they're at 60. By no means is that bad, but early game when you don't have a lot of mana generation, like your Senna might only cast once or twice, she might not even crit. It might quite literally just be like a 30 AP item that you slammed, which is pretty low for a slammable item, because she just didn't crit either time. Now, if you also have like Jeweled Gauntlet, right? So watch when we exclude, sorry, I meant Hand of Justice. Hand of Justice gives you crit chance because of the way it's built. Because it's built out of a crit and a tier, right? So your champion gains more crit chance. So the Jeweled Gauntlet itself is more likely to crit. The spell is more likely to crit. When we exclude Hand of Justice, all of a sudden, Jeweled Gauntlet is not even averaging a 4, right? It's a 4.5, sorry. It's top 4ing less than 50% of the time. It's winning less than 12.5% of the time, right? It's not that good. Same if we add Guard Breaker, it'll probably go even lower, right? 4.57. These are items that give your unit critical chance. So kind of the idea, I feel like I'm trying to over explain, I'm sure you guys get it, is that your spells critting is nice, but if they're not consistently critting, which will happen a lot early game because you're not casting a lot and you don't have additional crit chance, it can kind of be a dead item. But yeah, Jeweled Gauntlet is a fine item. I'm not saying never build it. Just, I would say do not slam it if you have another alternative. If I had tier Rod Bow, if I had tier Rod Crit, I would almost always slam Hand of Justice over Jeweled Gauntlet, because Hand of Justice just does a lot for being built. Whereas Jeweled Gauntlet does a lot when you have other additional things kind of boosting it up. I hope that made sense. That's kind of more of a general guide of TFT, I would say, more than this specific patch. This is something you should keep in mind with IE and Jeweled Gauntlet in general. But I've noticed it happening a lot these days, maybe because Senna's more popular and Ahri's becoming more popular than they were last patch, that people think Jeweled Gauntlet is like, oh, I'll just build it because I'll use it on one of my items later. Yeah, just be careful. Okay, next I want to talk about the AD flex options. A common strategy right now is that people are kind of just building AD flex items, and they're going to play either Caitlyn or Ezreal. And then when you look at the stats, Caitlyn is just better, right? So we look at the stats here. Caitlyn averaging a 4.56. It's not the best, but she's holding her items. That's good. Ezreal averaging a 4.69 is much worse. The thing is that for these 2 units in particular, I think I think the stats are a little fake because Caitlyn is getting kind of over buffed in the stats because people are putting a true damage spat on her. Her and Senna are both rapid fires. Getting a true damage spat is one of the best things you can happen in this patch. As we see here, we exclude true damage and it goes up to 4.69, exactly what Ezreal's was, right? So unless you have a true damage spat on your Caitlyn, she's not inherently like a super strong unit. She's fine. By no means is she not like clickable. But the stats are a little bloated because people are giving her a true damage spat, and vertical true damage is a very strong trait this patch. If we look at Ezreal, he kind of has the opposite problem where people kind of greed out Heartsteel and then they just die, which kind of ruins his thing. So if we exclude 5 Heartsteel, 7 Heartsteel, right, he went from 4.69 down to 4.54, way better. So if you're using him as specifically an item holder, you slammed 80 items, you have an option of Ezreal, you're just going to give him your last whisper and whatnot, he's good. He's pretty good. His stats look bad because people die when they're greeting out Heartsteel stacks. Like a lot. Like his stats went down quite a bit when you exclude 5 and 7 Heartsteel. We didn't even exclude 3, which is like pretty normal. You might actually play 3 with him and set if he was like your chosen, right? So yeah, if you're just using Ezreal as like a big shot who will hold your items, maybe you want to play Jhin later, he's good. The stats might look like he's not the best, and it might look like Caitlyn's way better, but I would say they're somewhat equal. I would actually say I think Ezreal's better if you do not have a true damage spat. Just my opinion. The other thing about Ezreal that I want to talk about in general, one of the biggest baits, I don't know if this is a huge bait, but Spirit Shojin is still the most played item in the game, and it's averaging a 4.4, not that bad. It's still good. By no means am I trying to say don't build Spirit Shojin, but what I wanted to talk about here is that Shojin actually got nerfed in this B patch, right? So it used to give you 25, 80 in AP, now it went down to 20 on both ends, and blue buff actually got buffed. So blue buff now grants you 20% AD. This makes it way better on AD units like Ezreal, and it just makes it more flexible in general. Before, last patch or 2 patches ago, you would only build blue buff if you're going to play around Ahri, and there was almost no reason to play around Ahri because everyone was fast 9ing, right? Now Ahri's a good carry. I think Ezreal's better. And blue buff, if you have the option to play blue buff or Shojin, now I'm specifically talking about you have the option for either. Both of these items are still good. A lot of units like mana generation, but I personally think blue buff is just better now. For a lot of like flexible play. Now, if you're gonna use specifically a Shojin because you want to play a champion who uses Shojin extremely well, yeah, of course, slam it. But let's say you have the option to slam a blue buff and you're wondering, can I flex this later? The answer is yes. So we look at Ezreal. You give Ezreal a blue buff. We're not excluding any... Oh, 4.18, what the hell? We're not excluding anything. We're not doing anything. We're just Ezreal with blue buff. He does very good. He top 4s 54% of the time. He wins out 20% of the time. We go to Ahri. Still very good, 3.87, right? That is very good for an item she's getting the most, right? So if you build the blue buff early, you still have Ezreal as an option, have Ahri as an option. And the other big thing I want to talk about is Jhin. Jhin with blue buff is extremely good right now, 3.6. Of course, it's harder to get to Jhin because you can't just find a chosen Jhin at level 9 nearly as easy as you used to. But when you give Jhin a blue buff, he averages at 3.6, and it's just such an easy transition. Ezreal is a big shot. Jhin is a big shot. They both do very well with blue buff. Another thing with blue buff, I don't know if it says in the patch notes, there was a bug where blue buff, when you get a takedown with blue buff, it used to give you 15% damage amp, but it was actually turning off if you got another kill. Now they fixed that. They made it so it gives you AD, which makes it way better on Ezreal and Jhin. Overall, just a much more flexible item than it was last patch. I think it's better than Shojin myself. If I wanted to play around flex, I like giving it to Kai'Sa. I like giving it to Lulu. I think a lot of like the units on your way up to the 4 and 5 costs are pretty good at holding it. Well, not a lot, but a decent amount, right? Kai'Sa's good, Lulu's good, Seraphine's okay. Again, some of these champs, Shojin's a bit better. Plus, Shojin you don't need 2 tiers, right? It's easier to get 2 different components in the same one twice. But if the option's there, because it gives AD now and they fixed the bug, it is a very good item. I think this item was almost dead last patch, so people kind of erased it from their memory, but it's really good. And just keep in mind that Shojin was nerfed. I don't want to say it's a bait to build Shojin now. It is still a great item, but just know that you don't have to. It's not just like miles above blue buff, and in my opinion, it might even be worse because there's so many good blue buff holders now. Ezreal, Ahri, Jhin are the big 3 that can just straight up win you games with that item. And yeah. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about is just general reroll comps, right? So a lot of people think that some of the units that got nerfed last patch are just dead. That's not really true at all. Samira 3-star, averaging at 3.7, still really good. MF, people were saying Jazz was dead early into this patch because they nerfed so many parts of it. 3.66, it's one of like the best rerolls. Even if we exclude That's Jazz Baby, which also got nerfed by the way, 3.78, still very good. Of course, these are like survivorship bias because you have to hit MF3. The people who hit MF2 and died are not in these averages. But if you're in a good spot that you're pretty confident you'll hit MF3, you're pretty confident you'll hit Samira 3, they're still very good even though those comps were nerfed. A lot of people like playing reroll now because you don't feel like you have to go 9 to win out, which is great. But I want to talk about some of the other ones. Now, as we talked about with Blinged Out, Senna 3, very, very good option. Averaging a 3.6 on a 2-cost reroll is insane. The problem is a lot of people use Senna as item holder or just because they're playing some true damage because it's a very good trait, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of people are playing Jax right now. Jax is a very good 3-cost reroll, and I feel like people pretty much, that's about it. That's what people think are like the only ones you should really be playing. If you just look at the overall stats, Yone is one of the worst performing 3-stars or 3-costs, sorry, at 4.86. That's like terrible. But Yone reroll is actually extremely strong right now. If you're in a position where you could play it, he's averaging a 3.67, which is insane. It's very good. The other nice thing about Yone is that he uses like kind of the generic frontline items, or sorry, melee items. Bloodthirster, Titans, Hodge, Edge of Night, IE is okay, Sterak's not bad. Triforce is really good, especially when you get the prismatic augment that gives you double, because you'll probably also be playing Zed. So I actually think this is a very good comp to kind of default to. I shouldn't say default. I don't think you should ever default to a reroll, but I think you can slam a lot of the items Yone likes and then realize later down the line, can I play Yone? Because if you can't, so many other current meta units use these items. Zed can use all of these, Kiana can use all of these, True Damage Akali uses these, even KDA Akali is not bad with a lot of them. Yorick can use these, like so many later game units use these items. So really keep Yone 3 on your radar. It's an extremely good unit if you actually hit the 3-star. And if you're in a position not to hit the 3-star, you can always just pivot out, give the items to Zed, Kiana, whatever. Another one is actually Yasuo. So Yasuo was kind of a joke of a unit last patch, and he's still not the best, but when you go him to 3-star, he's at 4.3, which is not bad for a 1-cost. Yasuo is never a unit I would just try to force. If I like found 2 Yasuos and then a chosen Yasuo in my next shop, like in the creeps, then I would for sure consider playing it. It's like, it can be a free top 4. One thing I wanted to stress is that his build actually matters quite a bit. So when you give him these exact 3 items, i.e. Hodge, GA, he's averaging a 4.16, which is insanely good for a 1-cost reroll. Some of these other, like, I think he's a little less flexible than he appears because he's similar to Yone in that it looks like you can just give him like the frontline bruiser-ish items. But these other options are way worse. Like giving him Sterak's, i.e. Bloodthirster, goes down to a 4.5, which is not nearly as good, obviously. He's a little flexible in his items for sure. I think his best item personally is the GA, or whatever it's called now, Edge of Night. The builds that don't have it seem to be pushed up quite a bit on their average placement. So yeah, I think Yasuo is a little underrated. Some people think you shouldn't even click him or you should just use him as an item holder. I think using him as an item holder is also great because you can just give him these exact 3 items if you want, and if you turn out you don't want to play Yasuo, you just give these items to Yone, Zed, like we talked about earlier. You could even give him items that aren't that great because maybe they're better on Yone and Zed and not actually use the 3-star. But very similar to Yone, you can kind of plan around playing Yasuo 3 because you hit chosen Yasuo, slam items on him that you think are okay, and then realize, I'm not hitting enough Yasuos, I'll give these items to Yone or Zed or whatever. I think Yasuo and Yone are 2 units that you should really have on your radar for this patch. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If there's anything else you want to hear about for this patch, let me know. I'll probably do an updated video in about a week or so because we're going to be on this patch for so long. Maybe some new underrated stuff will creep up or some overrated stuff we'll find out about. That's pretty much all I want to talk about. I don't want to mention Jax too much because a lot of people know he's like the newcomer OP reroll. Just wanted to talk about some of the things that are being underplayed or overplayed that I think. And yeah, if you appreciate... And yeah, if you learned something if you enjoyed the video, you learned something, etc., I would appreciate a like, comment, and subscription. Stay beautiful, my friends. I'll see you next time.